Awesome. And we're live on YouTube. Welcome everybody again to another Open RFC meeting hosted here at NPM. My name is Darcy Clark. I'm your host. And we'll quickly dive into the agenda, which I will link here with the meeting notes for folks. If you want to make sure that you've added yourself to attendees. Claudia's again agreed to kindly take notes. Appreciate that, Claudia. A few housekeeping notes. This call again is a way for us at NPM to essentially interface with the community and hopefully be moving conversations forward, having another outlet for community to interface with us, and hopefully be moving RFCs and feature work forward based on community feedback. All these calls, as well as any interactions on the actual npm/RFC's GitHub repo, are under the code of conduct, which you can find a reference to on the actual RFC's repo. And with that in mind, is there any announcements or anything that folks wanted to put on the agenda? Potentially, Wes, did you want to add a note?
No, I think we should just probably, well, I mean, unless you want to discuss as a part of this somebody could go and open as an RFC. I know we haven't really done that before. We've only discussed existing RFCs, but I think there's definitely an RFC worthy of writing up on the audit stuff.
Sure.
Do you want to add that as
RFC? Sure. We can add that as a item here to the agenda.
Yeah, maybe put it on the end and we can just see if there's time left.
Sure.
Yeah, a request for an RFC.
Yeah, right. Yeah.
Awesome. Okay, so with that in mind, also, I guess one quick announcement that we should put out there. We've been starting these deep dive meetings that are alternating from the Open RFC calls that we've been running for the past few months. And that's started about a month ago. We've now run 2 deep dives, and we're going to go into the notes a bit and just do essentially a Cole's Notes TLDR later in this call. But just to let folks know that that's another meeting that we're running. So you now get twice as much NPM in your life each month. So that's pretty nice. And hopefully folks can be joining in on those calls. So same time, same place, now weekly deep dives are again, focused around a specific RFC or topic that we want to dig into more thoroughly, whereas the Open RFC meetings are tailored to the broader conversations and try and move different issues and PRs forward at a higher level. So given the agenda, let's dive into the first, essentially our RFC, which was reevaluate usage of update notifier. Roy, I think you opened this. It's number 118. I'm not sure if you want to speak to the intent and where we're at with putting something together, and or Isaac, if you were the last person I think that's on the call that actually commented on this.
Yeah, I can start, I guess.
Sure.
Yeah, so basically, yeah, we ran into some issues in the past with the update notifier, and it's been brought up to us more than once that it could be kind of like nice to get rid of it or replace it with something else. So I kind of just wanted to like start a discussion. So it's basically an RFC, just to get that conversation started. But one, yeah. But one thing that changed though since I opened that is that the folks from Yeoman, they actually gave me write access on the package itself. So now we can have more hands-on in the maintenance of update notifier itself. So there's that change to also take into account.
Right. So I mean, it's good that you now have access to that. And that was actually a good surprise that you were a part of that org. But I think at least I'm in the camp of it would be great. Less dependencies is probably better for us. And it is going to bite us less often, especially if it's pretty simple logic that we could be baking into the CLI itself. I'm not sure, Isaac, if I didn't have a chance to see what you were commenting on. Did you have any thoughts there?
Yeah. So, oh, I can't put my hand down. Yeah, so the thing I was thinking we could do is actually just put a header in the NPM registry that says like you're using this, your user agent says that you are using this version of a client and there's a new version of that client, so you should download it. And we could even do that conditionally, like if people are using Yarn, then Yarn will send a user agent header and we could tell them that there's a new version of Yarn. And same for PNPM. And so, those other clients could just start listening on the same thing. I think Update Notifier is a great tool for things where you're for like general purpose third-party modules. But it is a little bit opinionated about sort of how it writes to the terminal and how it draws that pretty box and what the box looks like. And it kind of is a weirdly like disjointed experience from the rest of NPM's output, which we're usually, pretty consistent about. So I think baking something directly into the CLI just sort of for NPM itself is not so terrible, even though it is sort of duplicating some of the functionality in a module that already exists.
Yeah, that header idea sounds awesome. Yeah, and I think it's going to be appreciated by the other package managers.
Mm-hmm.
Question: would it, if you did not send that header, as in the case of a registry proxy, what would you see the behavior being? Right, because right now it doesn't rely on anything on the proxy on the registry side.
Right. So if you don't send that header, then you don't get the notifier telling you to update.
Good.
Which, is probably fine. A lot of proxies do just pass along whatever headers the registry sends. So I don't think it will be relevant for a lot of people. But if a proxy then wants to filter out that header, it totally can. Or if it wants to push a different header that says you should be on NPM version, whatever, then folks could use that as a way to kind of keep their teams in sync.
Yeah, so that's kind of where I was going with that. Is I could picture something we would use would be probably having a more controlled approach there. So one of the things we often consider is, there's a difference for your average user and your company user. We want centrally managed experiences in a lot of these cases, whereas, as a, open source engineer, you probably don't want, well, not that you don't want, you just won't ever get centrally managed, right? You want to be on the update, the most up to date, whereas like we might not want to do that at a company. So having that considered there, which is I think really good, having it be a header makes us able to centrally manage that in a way that we can't today. So I'm definitely thumbs up on that.
I mean, technically you could just by having your proxy sort of club or mutate the npm pacument, but yeah, it's not great.
Yeah, I don't think we want to do that. I mean, we want people to be able to install whatever they want. We just want, if it's a matter of if we do start to take more control over centrally managing what we recommend, right, because the update notifier is really just a recommendation, not any sort of, forced thing. So that would just be another tool in our toolbox for helping recommend folks on to other versions.
I'm wondering going forward then, this RRFC, so I know you put possible actions, like have we decided what a good way forward would be based on that conversation, Roy?
Well, I mean, I think I can write a proper RFC. And I think I love Isaac's idea of having it as a header.
Are you gonna have time to do that at some point?
Yeah, I think so. I think you can do that right after, in between workspace and stuff.
Okay.
Yeah.
Cool. And we'll have to carry on the config, I guess. It looks like there was a message written by, I guess Matt Travi, who originally made the implementation for config to actually disable the that prompt. So I think we're gonna have to carry that forward if we decide to move forward with these recommendations. Yeah.
It also saves an HTTP request.
Yeah, that's huge actually.
Which is nice.
Yep. Cool. So action item there then, Roy, is to follow up and potentially make a quick actual RFC. Do you want to keep then this issue open, or you'll close it once you open in the PR?
Probably close it, but just to make sure, just be sure I understand, like Isaac, in your idea, the header is put into the document request, right? Or you're talking about making an extra request?
No, we would not make another request.
Okay.
And essentially, it would just be the sort of simple, stupid way to do it is the registry looks at the user agent header. If the user agent header is a known client and it's not the current latest version of that known client, then it just includes the header in the response. And so it doesn't have to be too particular about what kinds of requests get which kinds of headers. It just puts it in all of them.
Yeah, sure. Okay.
And then if the client ever sees that header, then it will print the warning that says, hey.
Yeah, and it can be a very different warning for NPM 7. Can be our own module, right? Doesn't need to be the update not fire anymore.
We can also say things like, this is a breaking change, or there's a new version on next if you want to try it, or we can limit it to only things that are within your same major version or whatever. So that does give us a little bit more control than we're likely to get in a reasonable way from Update Notifier.
Yeah.
Nice. Sounds good.
Cool. So moving on, the second item on our agenda, essentially issue number 115, another RFC, add top-level bin dependencies to package JSON. Jake couldn't be here. We unfortunately didn't ping him though. I'm wondering if anybody's had a chance to look over this other than Jordan, who's also not on the call.
Yeah, I can give a little bit of backstory on this one. This one came up in the CLI issues. So I basically asked this person to write an RFC or at least an RFC to start the conversation. But after that, when I followed up with the actual idea, I think it might be actually better to might be something better to discuss in the scope of the package maintenance working group, because it's a very fundamental change. Like basically it proposes like a different type of dependency as a bin dependency, and like installs like basically you would place things in a different place, not in your node modules, so that you get a better separation of like what you tools that you depend as on their bins, like ESLint, TypeScript, that kind of stuff. So it's a very wild proposition.
Yeah, and I followed that with, I agree, it is very wild. So he also was chatting with me on Twitter a little bit about this. So I also read through it.
Oh, nice.
And I see this as a big change, which doesn't have a lot of upside for most folks. I'm not saying it is a bad idea, but because it is so drastically different than, and because it is drastically different, and the overlap with just having them be dev dependencies, which is what they are today, is sort of unclear. Like there's an overlap here, is like what he's saying is some set of dev dependencies are slightly different
Yeah.
than other dev dependencies. And it's like, well, okay, slightly different, but like, what is the win here? And the win is where I say I feel like the amount of effort it'll take to change something like this is really high for the win, which is not looking in your node modules and seeing thousands of things because Babel, right? And it's like, totally, I get it. I hate that. But like, also, what difference does that make to any average user? Like, I think almost none.
Well, this is also kind of comes down to, and just a, a possible possible approach that you could use, Wes, if you hate that. Have you tried not hating it? Like,
touche. No, I was saying that more in the like,
okay. It's not
like I'm not trying to change the status here, so I'm good with it. When I say I don't like it, it's we have ran into problems in some edge cases, and I don't want to overstate these problems. They are not real big issues or anything, because of this. So one example is the ability to import something which was not directly a dependency, but happened to be installed by something like a dev dependency on Babel, where somebody then had a Babel transform. I've seen this happen where they didn't actually install it, but they were able to use it because it was installed by some other underlying dev dependency, which was just like a thing. And that's a totally different issue than what this is trying to propose, I think.
That's also, that's also the general problem of unlisted devs. I think this particular change is very big. I haven't had a chance to go through and really evaluate it. It's very subtle, and it will have, adding a new dependency type is a change that ripples all throughout the system. And it's something that also affects other package managers who then kind of have some pressure to support it, and have to do the same kind of thing. So it's not a small change at all. We also have to worry about the backwards compatibility if you have something listed as a bin dependency, but older versions of the CLI won't know how to handle it, and so on. So it's something that it has to be dealt with very carefully. I think the last new dependency type we added was peer dependencies, and like we're still like solving all the problems that and all the kind of subtle edge cases that introduced. So I think that the win here is really not clear to me. If it's just that you don't want to see them in npmls, like we could make npmls not show you as much stuff. I mean, it is dumb that like I run npmls in a package that has one dependency and a dependency on tap, and I see 1,000 Babel things because NYC and React and T-report and everything else. So like that's fair. The thing of like, well, when I ls my node modules folder, like A, I don't think people do that much. Just otherwise there'd be much more outrage over it. And B,
sorry, I had to actually unmute to laugh at that because I completely agree.
B, like we could solve this and the unlisted depths issue in more clever ways. One idea that we've tossed around a little bit in the past is actually having a node modules folder nested under your node modules folder. So anything that is not a direct dependency would go in /node modules/node modules. And the tree resolution would all still work because it would sort of find it in a parent's node modules folder. But when you run npm ls, you would only see the depths that you're actually directly depending on.
Could I maybe, I think we could solution on unlisted depths. I have a very personal investment right now in a different approach, but I think this is subtly a different issue, and maybe it'd be better for us to have a separate discussion on unlisted depths.
Totally fair.
Okay.
But my point is just like any solution we have for unlisted depths would probably also solve the, running ls in your node modules folder problem by hiding them somewhere else.
Sounds like a filter flag or just some sort of flag to.
Well, I'm talking about like
depths.
like ls1, like just the.
Yeah.
Yeah. The other thing that I I wasn't really clear on is like a lot of bin dependencies really are, it's really essential that you are requiring that same version of the thing, right? Like the bin is designed to work with, you know, a bit of code that's using the lib that it provides. So, you know, this is definitely the case in a lot of Babel and like Babel CLI stuff. It's the case for NYC, for TAP, like, or not so much for NYC is just a standalone binary, but it has very particular ways that it expects to be used. Test frameworks are a great example. Like if you're using the jest CLI, it expects that when you do require jest, you're getting the same thing, right? You're using that version of its code. So I don't know. This seems like it introduces a weird opportunity for an impedance mismatch and like version mismatches between projects in a way that like it's just going back to global dependencies. Like this is why you should install things locally and use npm scripts instead of installing them globally. So I'm more, I think, more leaning towards the idea of the point that like this is not a bad problem. It's not an invalid problem, but it is a solution that is more costly than the benefit it provides.
Yeah, so I mean, I think there's a solution there where we can say if you don't like what you're seeing in LS, there's an option to filter that through depth in terms of what you're seeing. So depth 1 or whatever you want to.
Just dash production, right?
Sure. So there's ways in which you can essentially be narrowing in on the actual true depths. So then this, I feel, Roy, if you've already had the conversation to bring this up.
Yeah, I think the actual item would be to just actually go to that thread and reply with these conclusions, right?
Yeah, that's what I mean. Like essentially to focus in on the actual thing that they're trying to solve for, versus creating like, and also they've created a solution for themselves, like in user land. So if they want to actually support something, then you can create tooling to support whatever you want in package JSON, right? So we should encourage them to see if they get traction there. Then that's maybe validation that people want this. Yeah.
And then as another follow-up here to talk about unlisted depths.
Mm-hmm.
Do we have any open RFCs to continue that conversation, or do we need another RFC?
If you'd like to write one, Wes, you can.
There is an issue.
You know me and my ability to actually deliver on these. I come to the meetings, but I'm pretty overbooked at the moment. But
go ahead, Isaac.
So it's issue number 47. What to do about unlisted dependencies means discussion question. And I put a lot of. This was a while ago now. It's back in August. Posted this issue. So.
Awesome. I will write up some of my thoughts here. Thanks.
Cool. So moving on, let's dive into PR number 114, RFC expand list of ignored files. So again, I'm pretty sure this is Roy championing this through. I'm not sure if Jordan's not on here, but he was the last to essentially comment on this.
Yeah, with a surprising comment. I already found a use case where missing editor config files would break someone's workflow. So maybe that's a good indication that we might end up not doing that, not expanding on that list, because I don't know. I feel like I want to err on the safe side here, and any breaking change like this is doomed to break someone's else weird and wonderfully weird workflow. Like everybody has their taste, right? And I don't know. I think erring on the safe side, it might be better to not do that at the end. But any other thoughts?
So wait, is not do it mean as opposed to do it like as a warning and then a breaking change kind of thing? Just to be clear.
Oh, I don't know. Yeah. Okay. Yeah, we could do it like add it behind a flag. But again, like I think this is the kind of thing what we're getting. It's kind of not much compared to the risk of to the ecosystem, right? So because
So I
what
think-
we're getting is basically ignoring a couple more files from every package, right? But the risk is like breaking other people's workflow. So yeah.
So I think to Wes's point, and Isaac, is your hand still up? I just want to make sure.
I can't figure out how to put my hand down. Zoom only lets me.
There you go. I can do it for you. Good to know. I was gonna
I do have
actually
something to say on this though.
Okay, I'll go and then I'll give you the floor. I was going to say the exact same thing as Wes in terms of moving. If we did agree on a new set of files to ignore, expanding that list, the way in which we would implement it wouldn't just be to like do a breaking change. It would be to first warn and then to implement that, right? So you would give plenty of time for the ecosystem to realize that there would be that kind of change happening. Potentially when you were doing a publish, we would be warning that you're including files that eventually will be ignored in the future. That is like a possible solution. That's like, I think, the implementation of how to roll this out, or how to roll something like this, like a change like this, in a way that is the least disruptive. But if you're thinking that you want to completely like kill it to keep the status quo, then that's a different conversation then. Isaac and then Wes.
Yeah, so I was going to say that we have this this plan to have a warning or a confirmation before you publish. And
Right.
in that confirmation, we're going to have that list of files that we display. So what we could do is, if there are any files of matching a particular base name pattern, then the default confirmation is no, and we print a warning that says like, hey, you've got like a .swp file here. Are you sure you want to publish it? The list that's in npm pack list as the default ignored files should really be things that are like actively harmful to include, or so widely despised that there's no chance that anybody would, or very little chance that anybody would want them in a package. And then the workaround is you explicitly include them if you do want them there. So I think leaving that list sort of as it is, or being very conservative about how we add to it, would probably be a good idea. But things like editor config, and like your GitHub project folder or whatever else, we could just handle that in the publish confirmation step. And it doesn't even have to be a like, this is going to stop working type of warning. It could just literally be like, hey, are you sure you're including your GitHub folder here?
Right. That will be like a different list then, right? A warning kind of list instead of ignore.
Right.
Cool. Wes?
Yeah, so I definitely, now that you say the warning thing, I like that idea a lot, and that might resolve some of what I was going to say. But I think if you look at this list, so definitely the GitHub directory, it is possible that you could have secrets in there. And I think that's a fairly easy one, right? If you had like a secret for one of your, even if it's an encrypted secret, right, for one of your things, I assume you'd prefer not to send that out to everybody. And the GitHub directory can also get very large, much larger than some of the other ones. So I think that's like a pretty clear one that would be a good addition. Obviously, editor config, not as important here. But when I think I just closed the tab, I was looking at the list. But I think that having a way to add things like this, so I'm thinking also like .env files, which is another fairly common file that is not currently ignored as far as I know. Does that get ignored by Packlist? I was trying to look at the Packlist documentation to see.
Which one?
.env.
No, it's not on the list.
so having a process for doing these kind of changes, one way or the other, whether we're very conservative in general, which I think is a good approach, or not, still should be done. So if it takes something like this RFC to make that path easier in the future, I say move forward with it, because I think this is important. And I think I will probably comment and at least add the recommendation of adding .env files to this RFC.
Yeah, there's another one that I noticed also. It doesn't look like we're checking for .aws files folders, which is a common tutorial to be storing creds in. So that's a potential gotcha for checking in or distributing that. As far as I can see in the existing list, we're not looking for that stuff. So yeah, I like the idea of warning on publish.
I really like that. So I'm gonna put an action item here of basically closing this one, opening a new one for a warning kind of thing during publish. I really dig that idea, and that list can be more. I think we can expand on that way. It's gonna be way easier, right? Since it's just a warning, not an error kind of thing.
Mm-hmm.
My only concern there, and why I like the idea of default, is because that it's going to become noise for many folks, right? So if you see a warning every single time about your editor config, doesn't that, and then suddenly you get blindness to this warning, because that's just what happens, and then suddenly your .secrets file is in that list, and you've just gotten used to ignoring it.
Right. I mean, people can always add to the list of files to in order to remove the warning, right? Would it make sense?
Sure, but I'm still advocating a little bit for adding some of these defaults, like the GitHub directory.
Oh, into the actual.
The default ignore list. I think that's still a valid thing to do.
Yeah, there are two suggested changes now that we're talking about. One is, let's add some things to the default ignore list, but let's be very restricted, only the ones that actually do harm, not editor config or other things that are just sort of noisy.
Mm-hmm.
And then have a set of warnings that we put in the, or some kind of messaging that we put in the publish confirmation, which could just be an update to the publish confirmation RFC, to say, hey, if there are any files matching these patterns, then the default from the command prompt is no, and we print a message saying so.
Sounds good.
Sounds good. I'm gonna take a note on the RFC, and I can take some of these action items.
Awesome. Okay. If there's nothing else on that specifically, we should probably move on to issue number 95, RFC save peer flag. So I'm not sure, again, this was championed by you, Roy. Pretty much this is the Roy Open RFC meeting today. So it's good you have a stable connection.
Yeah.
Did you want to, again, give highlight our
overview
of this?
So just a recap. I think we discussed this in the past Open RFC meeting, but this was Jordan's suggestion. He wanted a save peer flag, in which I think we already got in Arborist, right? Yeah. So, but he wanted it to behave differently, and that I don't think we got there, right? I think Isaac can speak more to the rest of it.
Yeah, we covered this 4 weeks ago. It looks like
right.
The different behavior with how that save flag works is significantly more tricky to get right. So the way it's working right now is it's exactly the same as installed save prod or save dev or save optional. So yeah, I don't know. I kind of would want to see some clearer explanation of what exactly the difference in behavior would be and the argument for it. And so this is still kind of in the RRFC category. What we may want to do is actually close this issue and create a new issue that is specifically assigned to Jordan that says, hey, like, what is the different behavior you want for save peer, this thing that is already implemented in npm 7?
Yeah.
Sounds good. So close, reference the existing implementation, and then ask Jordan maybe to open a new issue.
Yeah, I will. I'll take that.
Awesome. Thank you.
Great. Thanks.
Cool. So moving on, issue number 56 feature. So create RC for yarn resolution. So this is what you were speaking to, I think, before we actually jumped on the call, Isaac. I believe this was, or this is different. This is yarn resolutions.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, this is different. Yeah.
So Carl isn't on the call. But Roy or Isaac, do you want to speak to this?
Yeah, I put it in the agenda because I would like to to hear Isaac's thoughts on it, because I know Isaac implemented accept dependencies to Arborist. So I'd like to know if this, like, if it fulfills the expectations, the things that they're asking about in this RFC or not. What is the difference if not? Yeah.
You know, I'm sorry, I'm a little bit behind on this. I apologize. I'm just reading this comment now. So yeah, resolutions does give you very fine-grained control. You know, if we just looked at it as like, let's implement the exact same type of resolutions that that Yarn does, it gives you very fine-grained control, but it unfortunately, I think, exposes a lot of the inner workings of like how the tree is built in a way that's not great, and sort of imposes a lot of adds a lot of foot guns to the experience.
Are you saying that is different? It is meaningfully different from yarn resolutions? I'm just a clarifying question. I'm not sure I understood the answer there.
So I'm well, we don't have an actual RFC, right? There isn't an actual like suggested change that's being contemplated. There was a package Overrides Rfc which got accepted and has not been implemented, and this is probably on the list to be at least reevaluated. It's over a year old. It's like almost a year and a half old. And then there's also the multi-target RFC, which is like super complicated and unlikely to be something that we can implement in any reasonable time frame. So, you know, one of the simplest ways is we do something very much like Yarn resolutions, which would be sort of the ultimate, like, yes, you can put any package you want anywhere you want it, but getting that to work properly within within npm is I don't know, like doing that in a user-friendly way is kind of tricky, right? Like, it is very much a power user feature, and
I'd like to challenge that.
Yeah,
I don't think it is. I think the problem, the reason why it might be today is because of lack of widespread support for something like this. I think this is something that many folks will use in very non-power usery kind of ways. I know, so one of the things I've been working on is doing a deep analysis of what features and tools folks are using inside of our Netflix ecosystem. Mm-hmm. And resolutions have surprisingly been used a lot more than I thought, and in a lot of weirder ways, just little simple things than I would have thought. So I think as you roll out that feature and people are educated more on it, I think it will be less and less of a power user thing.
Right. I mean, if you could share some of that in this issue 56, that would be really helpful. Like what kinds of use cases you see people doing with it.
Sure, I can. I've been trying to balance. Yeah, I will do my best to figure out what things I feel comfortable sharing, and this is all internal analysis, so I'm comfortable saying there are weird ways people are using things. I'm a little less comfortable right now until I reach out to the teams who are doing these things to make sure I understand why, using them as public case studies.
Yeah,
but we'll see if I can share some of that in the future.
I'm not suggesting that you share like, the details of their project or specifically which models they're using, or even that it's something happening at Netflix. It could just be like, a module X has a dependency on a Y and blah, blah, blah. Like you can
the context can be
make it really generic, just like, as a user dealing with this type of situation, resolutions can be used in this way.
Sure thing. Okay, I'll try to see if I can dig some of those up and do a little write-up.
The other problem that I have with, or the other, I don't know if it's a problem, but it's sort of an unfortunate feature of resolutions, in my opinion, is just the naming convention with sort of how you define which module you want to upgrade or change to a given resolution. And the challenge from a sort of elegance of tree management point of view is we have to, like let's say you have D2/left pad that you want to, just looking at like the Yarn resolutions help docs. D2/left pad you want to set at version 1.1.1. And then C/**/left pad you want to set at caret 1.1.2. And at the root level, you have left pad 1.0.0. So the thing that's tricky about this is now instead of having the edge definition be sort of solely dependent on that node, it's dependent on both the node itself and the root node that it's in, and it has to check to see if it's in that list. And this gets into tricky situations where like C depends on something else, which depends on left pad. And now we have to make sure that we essentially have to create that conflicting dependency and nest it in the appropriate place. So
have you seen the stuff with the Yarn v2 version of this?
I haven't looked too carefully at it, no.
Okay, it'd be worth looking at, if only to make sure we don't do the same thing. This is the feature where I'm pretty sure they started using Prolog because they went way off the deep end.
Right.
And the reason there that so if you take this to its ultimate conclusion, I think their decision making stands as valid. I think the problem is we should never take it to that ultimate end conclusion where you're like, yeah, we can solve for every single use case under the sun with a robust, DSL here, because that's not what people really want. What people really want is, I have this one damn thing, minimist, it's complaining, fix it, right? And it's like, all they want is to say blanket, fix the minimist thing so it stops telling me I'm audit failing, right? And so I think we just need to make sure we don't go too far down the road of, let's make this like that level of robust, because then we'll end up saying, yeah, we should follow them on using Prolog. Obviously, I'm maybe being a little facetious there, but we need to be careful there.
I think
it's unlikely I'm going to add Prolog to NPM.
Yeah, I think what you're saying, Wes, is accurate, where exactly the use case is, I want to quickly patch this thing so I stop getting bugged about it, and which may highlight the actual root cause of why people need resolutions, which is like they're getting bugged by some sort of CVE or security or audit like warning.
We could also just make audit fix better.
Yeah,
right?
that's
true.
Kind of what I'm getting to.
plan
No,
too,
totally. But there's another use case, and it's bug fixes. And this is a very common one, is you have a fork of something because you're working on trying to get it merged by the open source project, and everything in between because it's a deep transitive, and you don't have time to hold your product up. So you want to resolve it to your internal fork published. So again, and this is, so say it's not, in that case, it might be also replacing the dep, but sometimes like what we'll do is we'll shadow a public dependency with
Yeah.
an internal one and then do a resolution so that we get the like beta shadowed version. So we'll have like, in the registry proxy, we'll publish Lodash at 4.0.0 dash internal fork bug fix 1, right, or something, and you want the resolution to point to that internal shadow temporarily, right, which is a different thing than the we want to get the audit fixed.
Yeah. One way that that this is commonly handled in open source projects is you just install your Git dep, and if it's the same version, then it will resolve and not have to install another copy of it.
I completely agree. That is a common thing that is done. I actually would like to make sure we don't make that the only way, because that has a whole host of other problems.
Sure. It's not ideal.
Especially like once, or maybe not especially, maybe once there are some stronger guarantees between your Git state and the registry state, that would be fine. But there's a bunch of reasons why that probably will never be the case. In the open source world, once some GitHub and you all collaborate a bit, you might be able to have more guarantees there. But like between, again, I'm thinking internally here, the guarantee between what we have in Stash and our Artifactory is like nil, less than, right? You could have any random thing in Artifactory and any random thing in Git. And if the only way is to start pointing to a Git dependency, I think we've created a whole ton of other problems. So I just want to make sure we don't like let that be the status quo for this particular feature.
Yeah, what about aliases, Wes?
So aliases help in some cases here. So also aliases are fairly new as well. I say fairly, so like I haven't seen cases and then been like, oh yeah, alias, do this for this particular case yet. So I'm not sure I know enough about the ins and outs of them to say if they fully solve it. But right, so in alias case, you would say we have this internal version of the fork that's published under a different name, alias it to that. That's what you're saying, right?
The problem is that aliasing will not handle deep dependencies. So right. if I have, aliasing would work really nicely with resolutions, but if I had, if I depend on Lodash and I change it to, if I depend on something that depends on Lodash and there's a bug fix and I want to float my bug fix, and so I publish it, and then at the top level, I say I depend on Lodash at npm:/my internal Lodash at 1.2.3. When the tree gets built, my thing that depends on Lodash will look at that and say, oh, look, there's a version of Lodash, but it's not one that's going to meet my dependency because it's actually this other thing. So let me install a new copy of Lodash, and you're back in the same situation you were before. Right. So for example, with the minimus thing, we'd still have the broken minimus there.
Right.
The thing I would still like to do, though, before we get, like we've identified that there's some issues with the solution. Some of them are resolvable. Some of them are not. Could seek some resolution on just the solution, but the bottom line is I think there's some valid use cases which are not adequately addressed, and this stands firmly in a like RRFC kind of mode for now. So let's sort of identify and go through what those use cases are, and then try to design a solution that meets them with a minimum amount of foot guns and kind of overpowered features. Because I do feel like resolutions is a sort of overpowered feature, and that's a hazard.
Yeah, and it's a hazard we have precedents for leading to a path of, bad case, right? Which is looking at what Yarn, and that's why I say it's worth really digging deep on what the Yarn v2 solution is, and even reading some of the threads on their GitHub about it, because I think it is a great case study in deeply going into an engineering task without thinking about the real user cases and impact and the product side.
Bottom line, like NPM is not a tool that you use to build your own package manager. NPM is a package manager, and I feel like resolutions is sort of like, okay, here, now you solve this. Like if there's a use case there that you're using resolutions to do, then NPM is the tool that should be doing it for you.
So we should also probably look at what Gradle is doing. And I'm sorry, I'm bringing up a Java thing. I'm on a team with a bunch of Java folks, so I'm learning a lot. And they have some really interesting solutions in this space in their tool, which might be worth using as a sort of a guide, or at least learning from as well.
Yeah, anything you can share on the use cases. You're literally like one of the first people who's actually said like resolutions is useful for something other than NPM audit fix not working.
Okay, so yeah, maybe it's more important that I prioritize that then, because we definitely would be using this feature in NPM at Netflix. So I'll add this to my I'll bump the priority of writing this up on my to-do list.
Awesome.
Yeah, just to time box things, we have about 5 minutes left. And I know that Roy wanted to get to the next essentially RFC and hopefully ratify this. So RFC number 103, NPM workspaces. Roy, did you want to speak to this and potentially move this along?
Yeah, I think it is in a great position now to be ratified. We discussed it extensively, even did a deep dive call. But basically, maybe just pick up quickly to a couple of things that me and Isaac, we set up outside of the calls. But basically, we got rid of the limitation to not publish, the kind of artificial check on publish if there was a workspace is like we would prevent. We got rid of that. Like we might end up just having to deal with packages that are published that are already in the registry of workspaces anyway. So it's just better to deal with it in the install instead. That and a couple of open questions. I think yeah, I don't remember the other one. But anyways, now there's no more unresolved questions.
Yeah,
I think everything else we covered in the deep dive. So, Wes, do you want to take another look at that particular one just before we?
I am not sure I will have time. I trust y'all. I think we've had great conversations, and you have heard my opinions enough to take them into account. And cool. I will be working with this one way or the other, and so we can always iterate in the future. So I don't want to stand in the way because of my bandwidth constraints.
Sounds great.
Cool. So if you want to, Roy, move forward, ratify that.
It was going so well. I'm back.
Oh, we're just saying if you want to move forward with ratifying workspaces, we're all on board. Go for it.
Yes. Cool.
Cool. So with a couple of minutes left here, we added the notes from the deep dive. So RFC number 92, stage workflows for CI and human interoperability, essentially stage publishes, which we did deep dive meeting last week on. The meeting notes got posted by Claudia. Thank you again for doing that. And they're linked here in the agenda. I'm not sure if we wanted to quickly, Isaac, you said you wanted to do a Cole's notes about that discussion.
Sure. Yes, I will do that. I always end up with lots and lots of extra tabs.
Happens.
It sure does. So yeah, I posted an update, a comment in the RFC issue itself, just kind of summarizing where we landed. It's very long. There's been a lot of discussion, but essentially we had a couple of takeaways there. There is still kind of some discussion to be had around, or maybe the RFC could just leave it open as a server-side policy that we should auto-expire staged packages after some particular period of time in order to prevent people sort of staging something and then having it be just staged forever and never actually published and then having problems as a result of not having a deterministic URL. So the other thing is the include staged, instead of being a Boolean, it will be an array of names. So you can specify include staged multiple times to have multiple packages on that list. Otherwise, each one is the name of a package. And so for that dep and all transitive dependencies of that dependency, it will include the staged versions of those packages. And so it seems like we're relatively settled on the content address style tarball URL. It's since it can be stored in a lock file without breaking and requires, and it is permanent and cacheable without having to make, have the same one version, one publish will apply to staged packages. And we did not get into the last kind of use case, which I do want to outline more fully in that RFC when I get a chance to update it this afternoon. But essentially, if we wanted to talk about it here, I think, Wes, I believe you brought up some concerns about it or something, but the security detection case, we actually have an issue with this now on the registry, and it's not a public or widespread issue, but it is a thing that happens in npm, and it happens with Git repos and GitHub as well, where people publish something that has a secrets file in it, and it takes us some like we can tell if it has a secrets file in it when you publish the thing, but at that point there's very little that we can do, right? The options are either, if we detect a secrets file, we fail to publish and it doesn't get published, and then it's on you to sort of like refactor your code to make sure it's not actually secrets. And like sometimes it's like there was a case of a crypto thing that actually had a private key that was like should have been there. It was not a mistake. And what this would allow us to do, and also malware, right? We can our options for preventing malware are either we just fail to publish, or we let it go through and then we have to go through and check it later. But what that means is, if there's something that is potentially malware but we're not sure, then it can be very disruptive to not allow it to be published, because it could be perfectly valid, but a human has to look at it. And if it is malware, then we've just let something go out to the registry for some period of time, right? Even though it tripped an alarm, it's going to take some minutes or hours for a human to actually look at it. So one idea with staged publishes is, if there's something that's kind of in that gray area of a dubious case of it could contain secrets or could contain malware, but we're not 100% sure, we can accept the publish, but put it in staging rather than on the actual versions list, and reply with a warning to the user saying like, hey, your package, we got it, it's fine, but if you want to, it's going to be staged for some period of time because of reasons. If you want to publish it, if you want to install it in the meantime, here's the command to run to install this package. So I think that would kind of unblock folks who would otherwise be affected if we were too strict, and also give us a little bit more ability to make the registry a little safer.
Yeah,
I like that
like,
idea, by the way. Just want to say thumbs up. It's
Okay.
good.
yeah, I feel like that's a status or some sort of like metadata label for that stage publish, which I think we had spoken about internally before, Isaac, about the future state that we could get to with this feature and functionality, right? Like we could eventually have some sort of state like security scan is run and then given, or it's pending being run. It sounds like potential secrets in package could be true, false, like a state.
Mm-hmm.
But do we need that to gate moving forward with, or do we need to outline that, or should we essentially just say that potentially there would be some sort of object that we can associate metadata with a stage package?
Well, I think the fact that the registry that when you publish, even though you don't do the -- stage field flag, the registry may opt to stage it instead of publishing it. And that is something that needs to be in the RFC, because the CLI has to be able to, handle that, and we should. That's something that's comment worthy, I guess.
I didn't realize that came out of the deep dive.
It was
anyways,
something that I forgot to get into in the deep dive that we did not have time to cover. So
can we make that an RFC, like a separate discussion specifically?
Oh, like server or registry deciding to stage something?
Yeah, because that whole identification, like what we're talking is very like explicit. Like you run this command to stage. What you're talking
I
about
can have
is
that
like,
be a follow-up RFC, sure, yeah.
yeah, okay.
That would
Cool.
make sense to me too, because I think it doesn't seem like that behavior, that's a published behavior when you don't say stage, which is slightly different, I think.
Yeah.
Yeah, just to move
So
forward with
I will,
one.
I'll have it as an open question and say a subsequent RFC will go into this in more detail.
Awesome. Cool. So we're about 5 minutes over or more. Just want to be mindful of folks' time. I think that we haven't queued up exactly what the next deep dive conversation is. So I might actually put out a poll right after this with a couple topics or RFC topics. So I think be on the lookout there. We'll
Could we talk about, could we make it resolutions? Because I think that one's another deep topic that we've started some conversations on, and there's pre-existing RFCs.
Sure. Do we have consensus here?
Yeah, I think resolutions is a good one. I would like to make sure that we don't just say like, let's talk about Yarn resolutions, and instead let's say like, let's really dig into use cases for it without solutioning, because that would be much more useful. And if some kind of like better understanding came out of that for the RRFC, then that would be helpful.
Okay, so let me queue up a discussion in the RFC's issue thread or issue that I'll create. And it'll essentially be about the next deep dive conversation, which I think it sounds like, Wes, there's interest for resolutions. I'll try to narrow in on what the agenda would look like. So if it's bubbling up use cases, as Isaac noted, then that's, ideally what we're going to focus on. But other than that, I just want to say again, thanks for everybody jumping on today. And hopefully we can move forward on a couple of these threads. Feel free to poke me if we've missed anything or we didn't get anything today, or just feel free to add comments to the existing conversations that are happening in the GitHub repo. So yeah, thank you again for everybody jumping on, and I'll see you next week.
Awesome.
Thanks, everybody. Stay safe.
Ciao.
Bye.
Bye.